The title of my talk is more so the bottom one because most of you don't recognize the top one, which is El Cid or El Campeador, which we will get to a bit later. Or rather, I'll introduce it right now. He's the Spanish folk hero, Rodrigo, was a historical figure in medieval Spain. He was a Castilian knight and warlord who served the Christians and the Moors during a turbulent time and is well known in popular culture for his deeds. Is this on?
Hang on. Should be.
Oh, yeah. Is it delayed or is it?
No, it should have. Sometimes it just
Hasn't woken up.
Hasn't worked. No.
All right, there we go. So, this is Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar. So, he was born in the town of Vivar, as you all know, because of their Vivar, as a member of the minor nobility. He was brought up at the court of Ferdinand the Great, or the First, and Sir Ferdinand's son Sancho II of Leon and Castile. He rose to become the commander and a royal standard bearer of Castile upon Sancho's ascension in 1065. And this is his wife, Jimena Diaz. She was very loyal even during times of his exile and her imprisonment with their children. The children were in prison with her. It wasn't that she had to put up with it. But she outlived him but was eventually buried with her husband at San Pedro de Cardena. All right, Ferdinand the Great, he's the guy on the left. Rodrigo served under Ferdinand I, the King of Leon, Count of Castile, and the first Emperor of Spain, which you want to make sure you announce to everyone when you decide that you're going to be that, who doesn't look very nervous at all. Whereas the guy who drew this said, "What? I can't draw eyes." And based on the portraits of his sons, we're not surprised. That's his elder son, Sancho II, which looks like it was drawn by his younger brother during his toddler years. And this is the second son, Alfonso VI, and this is the younger son, Garcia, who didn't get a photo. But anyway. So, 11th century medieval Spain. People are fascinated by this period of Spanish history. Once you start looking into it, you realize it is very Moorish. And this is why I want to do this in person, so I can hear all your laughter. All right. So basically to set up the Iberian Peninsula, which is what Spain was called at this time, due to several conquests from the north of Africa, the Iberian Peninsula was heavily contested between the Muslim invaders and the Christian, or rather Catholic, Spanish. However, after various wars, independent Muslim principalities, referred to by the Muslims as taifas, emerged from the decline and fall of the Umayyad Caliphate of Cordoba between 1009 and 1031, which you don't have to remember. But all that means is that all that green section, they're actually made up of independent Muslim states who get brought in and out of various caliphates throughout this time. Anyway, this is Ferdinand's Spain. By 1065, the northern part of the Iberian Peninsula was mostly held by the Spanish and the south dominated by these taifas, as mentioned. Now, some of them did actually pay tribute to the Spanish. So what had happened was they had established Muslim occupancy, but then the ruling caliphates that were keeping them organized, they sort of fell apart, and some of them broke up into smaller kingdoms. And then those kingdoms were told by the Spanish, "We're bigger than you, pay us money." And so they had to pay tribute. So doing so, Ferdinand had done very well to be titled the first emperor of Spain since around 1056. So he established his authority and had sort of set up most of this area as his own and said, "I rule it all." But after falling ill during the siege of Valencia, he died 24th of December 1065. And everyone was very sad. His will revealed that he had divided the kingdom among his children. And it was divided as follows. The elder son, Sancho II, was given the kingdom of Castile. So Previously, all of that was owned by Ferdinand, and he said, all right, we're going to split it up. The second and most favoured son, Alfonso VI, was given the larger kingdom of Leon, and the youngest son, Garcia II, was given Galicia because it sounded similar to his name. Now, the existing taifas continued to pay tribute to the northern kingdoms, Badajoz and Seville to Galicia, Toledo to Leon, and Zaragoza to Castile. Now, Ferdinand's daughters, he had two, didn't miss out completely. Elvira was given the city of Toro, and Urraca received the city of Zamora, which are in there. So they didn't get their own country, but they did get a little city that they could play around in. So everything was divided up so that all the children could get along and live happily in their own kingdoms. All right, let's get ready for the sibling shakedown. Try to keep up, everyone. I'll go through this fairly quickly. In 1068, Sancho defeated his cousin Sancho V of Navarre and Sancho of Aragon in the War of the Three Sanchos. That's what it was called. The same year, Alfonso invaded the Taifa of Badajoz, a client state of his brother Garcia's kingdom of Galicia. Now, so Garcia said, well, that's mine. They're meant to be giving money to me, but Alfonso said, well, I'm going to take it and they give money to me. Sancho, concerned that his brother Alfonso had intentions of conquering his brother's kingdoms, defeated Alfonso at the Battle of Yantada, reinstating the status quo. And because he basically said, stop taking everyone's stuff, let's just leave everything as it is. Sancho actually sent Rodrigo to fetch Alfonso and bring his brother to speak to him about it. So he said, go and get Alfonso, bring him back to my castle, and we'll just sort it out. Said, leave everyone's stuff alone, okay? And that was fine. That all lasted for about 2 years. So, in 1071, teaming up with Alfonso, Sancho marched across Leon to conquer Garcia's northern lands at the time that Alfonso was in the southern part of the Galician realm issuing charters. So they said, we won't take each other's stuff, but we'll go and beat up our younger brother and steal his stuff. And they were fine with that. So Garcia fled to exile in the Taifa of Seville, while his older brothers partitioned his kingdom between them. So, they kicked out their brother and split their stuff. Sancho, what are we up to now? It's in there somewhere. You can see it's getting quite complicated, isn't it? When everyone just leaves everyone alone. Sancho soon turned on Alfonso, and in 1072, with the aid of Rodrigo at the Battle of Golpejera, he defeated Alfonso, who fled into exile in the Taifa of Toledo. So, Sancho takes it all. Sancho was crowned King of Leon on the 12th of January 1072, simultaneously holding all three crowns that Ferdinand, their father, had distributed to his sons only 6 years earlier. So it didn't really work out quite well to divide everything evenly and keep everyone happy. Not content with that, he was still greedy for power and decided to take his sister's stuff as well. Remember that they were right in the middle, in Zamora and Toro. Was their stuff. Now, it's fine to take your brother's stuff and kick him out of the house. Everyone's happy. We all understand. You beat each other up, you steal your own stuff, that's fine. But don't mess with your sisters. It's very dangerous. Toro, the city of Sancho's sister Elvira, that fell quite easily. But he came against a bit of trouble when he besieged his sister Urraca's better defended city of Zamora, and Sancho was stalled. Now, this is what happened. Urraca said to a Zamoran noble, Vejido Aldolfo, said, can you please go and pretend to be a defector and tell Sancho that you are going to tell him all the secrets how to invade our city. So she set this up, as far as we're aware. And so seeking a private conference with Sancho, he was going to tell him the weaknesses of the Zamoran defense. Once before Sancho, Valido assassinated him. Don't mess with your sisters, they'll get you killed. Using Sancho's own sword to literally stab him in the back. Valido was chased back to Zamora by Rodrigo, but escaped into the town through a gateway that is now called the Portillo de Traidor, which is the gateway of the traitor. Are you ready for this? Since Sancho died unmarried and childless, all of his power went to his brother, Alfonso VI, who almost immediately returned from exile. So Sancho had put in all this effort to steal all his brother's stuff, to consolidate the kingdom to himself. But because he didn't have any children, and because they were obviously very respectfully abiding by the laws of the family, which is, apart from their sister, don't kill each other, but you can just kick each other out of the country. As soon as he died, the second oldest immediately took power. Garcia, which is the youngest, was induced to return from exile, was imprisoned by Alfonso for life, leaving Alfonso in uncontested control of the reunited territories of their father, later taking on his title Emperor of all Spain. So, wasn't really worth the effort, was it, Sancho? So there was obviously all this infighting and all that sort of stuff. What has this got to do with Rodrigo? Let's have a look. Let's get back to him. So, he proved himself as a loyal knight under Ferdinand and rose to the position of commander and royal standard bearer under Sancho. Now, he was a very dutiful knight, and his prowess on the battlefield earned him the title of El Campeador, which actually translates to doctor of the field, but is usually referred to as master of the battlefield, so battle doctor. There's some of his exploits in there. As mentioned before, he actually went and fetched Alfonso after one of their battles, so actually went into his territory, grabbed Alfonso and brought him back to Sancho. And he led a lot of the conquests under Sancho into his brother's territory, and they were quite successful because he was a very, very good commander. He used a lot of psychological warfare against his enemies. He was very creative, and he used to collaborate a lot with people under his command. Now, apparently, despite being present at the Siege of Zamora, it's not known whether he partook of any role in that event. So, one thing we do know is that he wasn't very happy with Alfonso. While all the sibling squabblery was going down, he was doing what he did best, and which was being a loyal knight to his lord. So once his king had been killed, he found himself in the unfortunate position of having to be loyal to the current king, which was Alfonso, which he didn't really like. But he was very dutiful to his task, and one of the first things he did was supposedly try and get the truth out of him, which was to say, according to legend, Alfonso was forced by Rodrigo to take an oath on holy relics, which is pointless because Catholics don't really hold their word. But anyway, denying that he had ever been involved in his brother's death. So even though Alfonso was in exile down in the south, it was quite possible that he was in cahoots with his sister Urraca to get Sancho killed. But basically, so it goes, Rodrigo got him to swear on holy relics to say, no, I definitely didn't have my brother killed. What actually happened besides that is it gave rise to a mutual distrust between the two men. Alfonso, he tried to calm things down by offering his kinswoman, Jimena Diaz, to Rodrigo in marriage, as well as the immunity of his patrimony. Now, most modern historians deny that this ever took place, but it's still part of the story. Now, what also actually happened now under Alfonso, that he lost some of his titles and position despite his military prowess, but he was still recognised as being a great leader and was still utilised by Alfonso. So that we can get through a bit of history and don't take up too much of your time. He continued to dutifully serve Alfonso because he was the king. And as a knight, that was his role. He said, well, I've got to serve Alfonso, regardless of what I think about him. Now, in 1079, he was sent to collect tribute from the Muslim Taifa of Seville. Trying to get my double L's worked out. While there, he was attacked by the Islamic State of Granada. Now, remember that a lot of these Taifas were sort of under Spanish rule. And what actually happened was, strangely, both sides were supported by Castilian knights under Alfonso. So Rodrigo had his knights that were defending the city, and the Granadan Muslims had their own knights from Alfonso that were attacking. So they were both fighting each other from being supported by the same country. It was a bit weird. Anyway, what happened was in this Battle of Cabra, Rodrigo rallied his troops and he turned the battle into the rout of Emir Abdullah of Granada and his ally Garcia Ordóñez. So he actually changed the battle and was, instead of defending, they started attacking them and they pushed into Granada. Now, for whatever reason, this unauthorized expedition into Granada greatly angered Alfonso and he subsequently exiled him from the kingdom. So, whatever reason, Alfonso said, "That's it, had enough, get out, you're done." So, unable to serve his king, he actually ventured into Moorish territory and he wanted to find someone to serve. And he actually travelled to the Taifa of Zaragoza and was accepted into the service of the Moorish king Yusuf al-Mutaman ibn Hud, and served both him and his successor al-Mustayn II. Now, under the Moors, he proved himself to be, again, a strong commander, and he actually ended up leading a diverse force of Christians and Muslims. There was Muwalads, Berbers, Arabs, and Malians. And his success in some of these battles and conquests that he did under their rule earned him the better-known title of El Cid, which is the Spanish pronunciation of the Arabic Al-Sayyid, meaning the Lord, or the master of the battlefield. So he had these two titles. One was from the Spanish, one was from the Moors, but it was a Spanish pronunciation, but he's mostly known as El Cid. Now, a lot of this time, there were various incursions from Alfonso, but he refused to fight against Alfonso because he said, even though I can't serve him, he's my king, and I'm not going to fight or lift my sword against him. So whenever Alfonso himself was present in any of these battles, he refused to fight against him. So there were actually several battles that he won for his new king, and some of these were, so these are some of the conquests that he was involved with, and I'll let you read through those, but the main one is down in 1086 when the Almoravid invasion began. The Almoravids were a Berber dynasty from northern Africa, and they were led by Yusuf ibn Tashfin, and were asked to help defend the divided Moors from Alfonso. And what happened was basically they were Muslims from the north of Africa, and they basically came into the south of Spain to try and get all the Muslim taifas back into one rule. And in doing so, they actually defeated the combined armies of Leon, Aragon, and Castile in the Battle of Sagrajas. And Alfonso, he was injured in this battle. Now, terrified after his crushing defeat, he actually recalled El Cid. He said, "I know this guy can help me out. He's very, very good." And so he actually returned to Alfonso, but only stayed a short while. And he actually returned to Zaragoza. Now, basically, history is sort of divided as to what happened. One version said that he was quite happy to leave the Almoravids, who actually returned a number of times to try and take over Spain. He's actually one version says he's happy to leave the Almoravids and Alfonso to fight it out until one side was weakened, and that would allow him to do whatever he wanted. Another version states he was actually directed by Alfonso to retake Valencia, and any territory that he captured, he would become his rule. Whatever the case, we know that he went on to lead a combined Christian and Moorish army to create his own fiefdom in Valencia, defeating several rivals in the area. Now, I would like to talk through some more of these exploits, and I can do so after this meeting with some bonus content if you want to come and see me later. Anyway, let's move on to the main point. What I want to draw out from this history is that El Cid was true to his purpose. He defined himself as someone who served others, or rather served a higher authority, and he was bound by that quality, and it actually placed him under the service of those he didn't particularly like and was sometimes a threat to him. Now, as Pastor Rob has already used as an example. I'm going to do the same. It reminds me of somebody else. So, moving on to Bible stuff. The scriptures will be up on the screen. David. We know that David in the Bible, he was anointed to be king by Samuel. This is after a time where Saul had proved that he wasn't able to continue to follow the Lord's commandments, and he was told the kingdom was going to be taken away from him. David was the unlikely choice out of all the sons of Jesse. As we know that when the visit was organised, he wasn't invited. He was out in the back paddock with the sheep. They actually had to go and fetch him and bring him. Now, whatever he thought about this whole situation, he was still in a place where he had an attitude to serve. And we know that he ended up in the service of King Saul, who'd been told, as I mentioned, that the king would be taken away from him. With El Cid, there is a rumour, or rather some historical records state that he actually fought someone in single combat to be accepted under Sancho's rule. And we know that, as mentioned earlier, David actually fought Goliath by single combat to prove his worth as a warrior, and that led on to him being a great man of war. We know that Saul, as it said here, that he began to be suspicious or jealous of David, and it says that he began to eye him from that day forward. And there's a couple of instances where he nearly killed him with a javelin, and but David managed to escape a number of times. So it became quite dangerous for David to be in the presence of Saul, because he was quite aggressive about it, and we know that he was prone to these mood swings, which is why David was brought in there in the first place, to play the harp to calm him down. So obviously he might have gone, oh, he's just having a bad day where he's going to try and kill me with a spear, but I'll just run away, that's fine. But we know that this actually grew to the point where Saul was intent to deliberately murder David. So as we read in the end of this the scriptures, that Saul was afraid because he'd known that the Spirit of the Lord had departed from him. He couldn't feel that presence from the Lord at any point, and he was afraid of what was going on. David's wife, Michael, or wherever it's pronounced, we know that she assisted him when it was clear that Saul was intending to have David killed. So it reached to the point where they went, well, it's obviously not just a mild mood swing anymore. He's going to kill him. And as we read through the scripture, it talks about the fact that he told people, sent his messages and said, go and find him, and in the morning kill him. And Michael found out about it, so she let him down through a window, and she, in verse 13 down there, says she took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for his bolster and covered it with a cloth. And the scriptures go on to talk about how the guards came in, and they came in and found it, and there's actually an artist's impression of what they found. when they came in to his room, and obviously the ruse was up, and they realised he had escaped. So he's rejected by his own king, and he's gone into exile. He's actually, as fitting for a shepherd, he's on the lamb, so he's trying to survive out in the wilderness, wherever he can, with whoever will support him, and trying to serve whoever. But we know that he never rejected the opportunity to serve his king. And one of the defining moments between these two is when David is presented with the opportunity to kill Saul. And we see here, if you're familiar with the story, they're hiding in these caves, and Saul just happens to be in the area, and he actually goes into the cave, and David sneakily cuts some of the robes of his skirt, and when Saul comes back out, he reveals himself out in the open and holds it up and says, I had the opportunity to kill you, but I didn't. And he says there, some bade me kill thee, but mine eye spared thee. And I said, I will not put mine hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. And so there in verse 11 it states, he said, here's the proof. Check your robes, Saul. Oh man, you cut my robe. He realizes, and Saul sort of repents a bit at this point, but not for very long. He still goes on to chase him again. But David declares that he will not kill Saul, regardless of the fact that he knows that he's going to become king. He knows that Saul has had the kingdom taken away from him. He still respects that hasn't happened yet. And that until that point in time, he will let the Lord deal with Saul. And he will still serve him dutifully as he can. He was dedicated to serving his king, even at the cost of his own life. And we know that this respect carried right until the end, where after Saul's death, David laments for him. He's not excited about the prospect that his king has died and that now he gets to take over the kingdom. He doesn't have any joy over that. He's actually sorrowful that his king has died, even though this man pursued him to take his life. As we see there, this is in the middle of a conversation, if you're not aware of it, between someone who decides, here's an opportunity to get in with the new king. I'll tell them I killed Saul, which was a big mistake. And David said, once again, he reiterates that Saul was the Lord's anointed, and that shouldn't have happened, and he laments over his death. Carrying along with the parallels, we know that the legacy of David was that he was a mighty man of war. Even under Saul, when everything was going well, he led many successful battles and conquests. And as I said, they sang the pop song, David's killed his 10,000s, or whatever it was called at the time. And that was his reputation, and that carried on once he took power. He managed to, through the Lord's direction, reclaim the land of Israel from their enemies, establishing a country that would see peace and prosperity during his son Solomon's reign. We even touched on this near this passage in the first talk again, where it's talking about how Solomon was too young at the time, but David was gathering the materials so that he could build the temple of God, because he wasn't allowed to, because he was a man of war. But that was the promise that was given to him. So, just in case anyone doesn't know, that the term loyal to a fault means that you have a positive characteristic that you follow out so much that it can be to your own detriment. And that's really what I'm bringing out here. That David upheld his purpose to serve above his own gain, at the expense of his relationships, the expense of comfort, position, and any opportunity for power. He was loyal to a fault. He said, doesn't matter what it costs me, I will serve what God has asked me to serve. And let's go to the next example, which is what Pastor Rob mentioned as well. Bringing in this parallel, Jesus walked the earth with ultimate authority and power, but chose to serve others. He set the standard to his followers that his position was first to serve. And here we see here, as he washes his disciples' feet, he says, "For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. Verily, verily, I say unto you, the servant is not greater than his Lord, neither he that is sent greater than he that sent him." He never presented himself as one that was going to rule, one that was going to control. He always set the example of one who would serve. He was also rejected, not exiled so much, but rather in some places he was cast out of the town. And we know that he was rejected by those that he came to serve. And this artist's impression on the right is one of the times where they actually took him to the top of the hill and they were going to throw him down so that he would die, and he escaped. They hated him for what he said to them. despite the miracles he performed, many hated him for what he preached. And this is part of the prophecy that states that despite what he would bring to people's lives, that they wouldn't accept him. Jesus was also presented with a stressful time where he had to make a choice, and for our benefit, he chose to dedicate himself to God's plan. He persisted in his dedication to serve those that hated him. Now, in this, he wasn't serving the world. He wasn't serving the master of the earth or anything like that. He was serving humanity. He was serving us who rejected him, who didn't want him around, who cast him out. And he said, "Doesn't matter. I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to go through it because that is the plan. That I will put their needs above my own." He never took the opportunity to take power for himself. And he tells us that he had it. Right in the garden, he says, this could all be done in an instant. I could call my angels and this wouldn't even be a fair fight. You guys would be done for. But I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to fight against the one that I've been called to serve, which is us, which is humanity. And as a result, we know that he will be victorious. Because of his obedience, he gained the greatest victory over his enemy, defeating death itself. You talk about El Cid fighting in single combat and defeating a champion and becoming accepted under Sancho. You talk about David fighting Goliath and being accepted as a warrior under Saul. Jesus fought death with death itself, single-handedly defeating death for everyone. And now, as he has been exiled, as he has sacrificed himself for those that despised him, he will come victorious. And he has now gained the position of highest authority, and we know that he's going to take his place soon as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. These examples hold a commonality that can challenge where we see ourselves today, and which is why it works in quite well with what Pastor Rob was talking about. Whether we are volunteering or whether we are conscripts. And I guess I'm echoing that same thought. Are we loyal to a fault? These people, their purpose was to serve. They didn't take an opportunity for their own gain. They were exiled or rejected. They maintained a respect or dedication to serve those that hated them, even if it was a danger to themselves. They were masters of war or control over the fight. In Jesus' example, he didn't fight any battles, but he was a master of when the fight was going to happen. And we know that he said, the fight is going to be my crucifixion, and I will control when that comes about. And we know that he did fight and overcome death. And they were victorious and they became strong rulers. El Cid is just a natural example. I find it interesting because it's a little bit of my heritage, and I find it interesting. But King David is sort of a bit of a transition because it's a natural example of yielding to the Spirit so that the spiritual virtues can come to the foreground. And he trusted in God. He goes, "Oh, I've got opportunities here that I could rely on the natural, but I'm going to see it through and see what God will bring about." And we know that Jesus shows the ultimate example of the Spirit overcoming any natural opposition and bringing about an everlasting victory. So I guess the question is, are we loyal to the fault? Which I don't even have to go into much because we've talked about it already today. Here we see Jesus talks about, "Blessed are they which are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And, to love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. And whosoever of you will be the chiefest shall be servant of all. And we're reminded here, for even the Son of God came not to be ministered unto, but to minister and to give his life a ransom for many. Things aren't going to be easy, but as it ties in with what we've heard already today, when that is our conviction to follow the Lord, to serve his purpose, even to the cost of our own comfort, perhaps even our own life, it doesn't matter, because that's our drive. That's what we want to see. And where we're happy to be loyal to a fault, where we go, it might cost me, but it doesn't matter. I might get kicked out, I might be rejected, but if I stand fast, then I'm going to receive a wonderful victory and a wonderful position of power under my God. And I think that's it. Yeah, that's for later if anyone's interested. And I'll leave it there.